Hey, good morning, everyone, and thanks for waking up with me. The purpose of the Waking Up channel is a blog about waking up to the possibilities of things around us in our life and reevaluating things that we've possibly just started to take for granted or overlooked and they're right next to us in our life, and kind of shaking our heads for a moment and waking up to things around us that we're already in touch with, but maybe not necessarily including in our lives, or things that we've missed as we progress through this very complicated world that we have going on around us. Uh, this is uh, this is still in March, and this is National Women in History Month. So I want to pay a little attention to some of the things that are part of our society, especially since this is an election year. Uh, the women's suffrage movement started way back in 1848, and moved along very slowly for about 20 years, and then the Civil War broke out, and it was kind of tabled for a short time, and then in 1870 it kind of came back into play. But it wasn't until 50 years later, in 1920, that the 19th Amendment passed and granted the right to vote for women. So here we are 100 years later, and what I hear over and over by the political pundits and those doing polls and evaluations and stuff like that, the consideration of the women's vote, and in particular the black women's vote, seems to be of increasing importance to the evaluation of the polls and things like that. And I hear that from both sides. I remember the same thing being part of the conversation 4 years ago. And I find it kind of interesting that 100 years later, and this is where we've come, and change is slow. I understand that there's other things that are involved that we ignore all the time that seems to take forever. The fact that it took 70 years for suffrage to even pass and become legal is an issue, and now here we are further down the road, and women have much more freedom. They have much more rights than they've ever had. There were significant changes in the '60s as well that affected that, and that was certainly caused by the women's movement and their involvement in the variety of civil rights activist things that happened during those times. It was also during the '60s that, let's see, I believe it was '67 when the Supreme Court made a decision in Love versus Virginia that interracial marriages and interracial sex uh, and laws in individual states that might restrict that was unconstitutional, and made it so that people of mixed races could date and have physical encounters and things like that. And 50 years later, we still find that uh, prejudice is still racism is still very common out there, and yet I see a lot more openness especially among the younger people, the millennials in particular, and I see a lot more interracial relationships than I recall when I was young. So I'm enlightened by all of that, but I don't want to get too far off on that topic as much as the tributes that we owe to the women and the changes and the change of point of view. And this is going to lead to some things we're going to talk about in a few days or so. But you know, it wasn't that long ago. In fact, I remember within my own lifetime, a very common saying was women were to be barefoot and pregnant, and their place was in the home, in the kitchen, and being a homemaker. Which is a staggering comment, especially in light of all the recent changes with the Me Too movement and a variety of other things, and the importance that we're placing on women in the voting industry. We're looking to them and their decisions as far as the numbers and who's going to be determining our leaders in a variety of political offices, including the president. Uh, but this isn't about the politics as much as it's about our social norms and our viewpoints on women, and how that's changed over the years. And granted, it's been 100 years, and there's still a lot of inequality that exists in how we treat women. There's definitely discrepancies in pay, and I don't agree with that, but it's clearly a fact that's still out there, and there are things to overcome. And I see similarities in the transitions that we have for women, and the accomplishments that they've made and the contributions they've made to our country, and yet we still treat them in some respects as lesser citizens, and I find that interesting. It's something that I'm going to continue to do some homework on and explore a little bit, because for one, like on the labor issue, if you're doing the job, and whether you're man or woman, if you're doing the same job, then it should be the same pay. And we need to get past that stereotype that the man is the primary breadwinner in the household, because that's no longer the case. I don't know of hardly, I know of very few single income households these days, including among people who are, of high income status. There's usually both people are working. So it's not just a matter of being low income. Hopefully my camera didn't fade there. I just got a battery notice, so we'll see how this turns out. Sorry about that. So it makes me wonder where we're headed with this, and how things are going to change, and how long is it really going to take for us to accept. I think the technology we have in our hands with our smartphones and social media, and the way it's just so pervasive in all walks of life within our country, within several countries within the world for that matter, that I think things may start to accelerate. The fact that it's 100 years later and we still have some archaic ideas, and that's just within our gender. There's certainly been an explosion of other things going on. Again, I think in part with the millennials, there's a lot more conversations now about gender fluid issues and where we're going with that, and I think that's going to be one of the big movements that we're all going to be hearing a lot more about over the next few years, and we're going to have to open our eyes up to how that affects our lives and what's going on with that, and how we're going to deal with that. And I think that's going to challenge a lot of our views on the workforce. It's going to challenge our views on our potential spouses and mates. It's going to challenge our views on modesty in restrooms and in the locker room and things like that, and where people are going to fit as it becomes a little more common and a little more accepted, especially by the generation that's coming in behind my generation, and the Gen X and the Gen Ys and all the others, as the millennials become more and more part of the economic force, and getting into politics and become part of the legislatures that in our various states. I think we're going to see a shift in a lot of the standards that have been around for so many decades, or I guess you could argue for centuries, really, in many ways. So I think the world is in a very high state of flux at this point. It's part of the reason why I started this channel, because as I get into these later years and I look around me, and at a time that I thought I was keeping up with things, and there are things I definitely missed, and things that I'm wanting to reevaluate and be more clear on, and maybe understand a little bit more of the history about how things came about and how long it's been since things have changed. Change is slow in many ways, and at the same time it seems that with the technology we've had the last 50 years, we're pretty much on a vertical climb of how we're shifting and changing and evaluating and thinking about what we're doing, and how we're treating people next door, and treating people in the workplace, and what's acceptable, and reevaluating conversations that we had just a few years ago, and realizing that those are no longer appropriate, and arguably probably weren't really appropriate at the time, but now with our heightened sense of sensitivity to certain things, to try and better understand the impact of our words, I think it has more value to have that conversation now. So, we can't erase our history. In fact, I hope we don't erase our history. I'd like to address what really happened, and not just the nice version that we put into history books, but let's try to keep it real. It seems that there seems to be two sets of facts for everything, and I don't think that's a wise choice. I think there should be some sort of way to get to the middle of that and be fairly evaluated and understand it, so that we don't repeat our mistakes, and that we learn from our mistakes, and celebrate the fact that we realized that we were making mistakes, that we've evolved and found a better way to treat each other. So I don't know if I really made my point very direct today, but hopefully you got the point. I mentioned early in the month that I wanted to give some tribute to women in our lives, and how they've made an important contribution to our society, to our world, to our planet. And I think I'll probably pick up a few individuals along the way this month to really highlight and underscore that comment. But give this some thought. There's change is slow, and yet we see so many things that's coming on around us, and think about where you're at and how you got there, and who do we owe that to. So that's me waking up, and I got to get off to work now. So I hope you're going to have a good day. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and feel free to leave your comments below. I look forward to having a conversation, but not just a lecture here. I would like to include you in your thoughts and your feelings, and shape this channel into something that's going to be constructive for all of us. So until next time, you have a good day. Thanks.